Greetings! Seems like Cyno and Ayato is getting a rerun today, and I thought it might be a good idea to talk about their general change in their team building experience, or if there's any, and their expectation that you need to play with them. Of course, I think the expectation portion is going to be more important. So let's start with Cyno. Now, Cyno practically doesn't have much changes to his core team mechanics. His strongest team is still this quick bloom team that you can just start in with an off-field Dendro characters. It could be Nahida, Dendro main characters, Yao Yao, Kole, Baiju. The list goes on as long as Hoyo keep on making them. Then another off-field Hydro characters being Xinqiu, Yelan, and you can practically go with anyone that you can think of. Even Ayato could work into some degree. The idea is just to have an off-field Hydro applicator. That's all. And the last slot, it could be for extra buffer, or you can go with a safer route, getting Beidou or Shooter like Zhongli, Kirara. Even Toma could count if you want to experiment in some exciting overloaded burning gameplay. That's essentially his Quick Bloom setup. Now the only changes to this team setup is there is Farina now. So you can actually go with a double Hydro, but do remember that Cyno don't have particularly large HP pool. So it's gonna be a miserable experience if you don't have a healer amongst the two other slots that you're willing to switch, like Baiju or Kokomi for instance. Otherwise, when it comes to gameplay, his gameplay style is pretty straightforward. You use his skill first, as it does generate more energy when he's not in his enhanced state. Then you pop his burst, then you can go free flow and dance and perform on the stage. Now, there's only one main problem. There are two main different playstyle. They're not exactly different, but you will get the point. You either play more intensely or a casual. As for the former, you are essentially building him with a 4-piece Thundering Fury set, which I'll call 4TF for now. And essentially, you have to perform pretty well in your game mechanics to pull it off. The idea is to make sure you can spam and the skill as soon as you could, and if you do it right, you should be able to use his under skill when the prompt pops up, so that you can still activate his burst unique attributes while gaining a lot more electro particles for the team. But the downside is it's gonna be pretty difficult to pull off to some players. I myself is not able to pull it off 100% of the time, so with regard to that, you might want to consider just going into a casual route, just going with the 4-piece Kill the Dreams. So that's it for this two main gameplay, but I do have to add in some additional note that since Cyno is an Pro-Am user, there's one unique advantage for Pro-Am user in that whenever they are in their infused form, their charge attack will always apply elemental application. So for Cyno, that will guarantee him to apply aggravate reactions or anything that you want. So this is something that you should take note of when deciding if you want to just slot in charge attack for extra damage. But Cyno isn't without his flaws. He's an burst-oriented DPS, so you do have to build a decent amount of energy recharge well, or you build your team around to support his energy requirements, like getting Favonius user to funnel energy to him, or to have a specific different rotation catered towards addressing this issue. But besides that, burst-oriented DPS don't have much, isn't exactly friendly for exploration. By the time Cyno activates his burst, his opponent probably turn to dust in fear of his mighty form. But nowadays there are harder mini-bosses found scattering across Fontaine recently, and this might be a mainstay feature for future regions. Characters like Cyno can still have a lot of uses towards these kinds of opponents as a mean to exercise his judgment. But when it comes to damage wise, you might not going to like what I'm going to say. He's a solid main damage dealer, but his damage is designed to take into consideration whom he is able to benefit from to reach his peak performance. And as such, his own raw damage is not going to impress anyone. But in return, it does raise his peak potential accordingly to who you provide to him. So in some sense, he has a low floor but an incredible ceiling. For example, one of his best team that I can think of would be Cyno with Baiju, Nahida, and Furina, and that will probably be one of Cyno's peak team, and that is possibly part of the reason why you may feel that he is lackluster. as there's really not much of an accessible 4-star alternative that could provide close enough experience to let you see what he could do at his near full strength. For instance, if you look into Dendro options, we really only have Kolei, Dendro main character, and Yao Yao as an alternative, and they require special attention to work around with Cyno. And that's pretty much it about Cyno. When it comes to Ayato, he's actually one of my most favorite character of all times. Now, it's not because of his bubble tea enthusiasm, but more of his story quest having some interesting inspiration for me to like think back once in a while. Of course, the story isn't for everyone, but nonetheless, we're going to go back into his core game mechanic of what makes him unique. When it comes to his gameplay, it's actually pretty simple. He has a passive that encourages you to swap out to your other team roster so that it can passively generate energy, and that actually encourages us to just use his burst first, then switch to your other team members to set up their burst support capability, then go back into Ayato to finish the job with his enhanced normal attack, then hold your attack button and things will work pretty well. It's worth noting, his skill has an additional unique capability. For instance, if you get locked down by Mirror Maiden, for example, or any kinds of skill that traps you in place, his skill allows you to shift out of the way, so that's pretty good. And since you are using his burst as well as his enhanced normal attack, these two category allows you to apply Hydro at a much quicker rate. When it comes to team composition, I think you already know a few of his popular choices, like Hyper Carry, Vaporize to some extent, Freeze, and Taser team comps. But the greater change to him ever since his release was the introduction of Dendro. So he have access to Bloom, Hyper Bloom, Burgeon, and Breach team comps. So life has been great. But because of that, the main focus here would be to look into Ayato's Hydro application rate. Now there have been a lot of characters to compare with like Xingqiu, Novelet, Kokomi, etc. But the whole idea around his concept is his wide range of Hydro application. Now you may think about, hey, Xingqiu could apply a lot of Hydro, but he's a single target, so dealing with a single target, of course, that's where he will shine and seems to have a stronger output than Ayato. But in terms of dealing with Horde, this is where Ayato would shine. Then you might want to bring in your discussion with Novelet, someone that can do AoE. If you are willing to do a 360 no-scope, easy enthusiastic inducing gameplay, then you can achieve almost similar result. Instead of going deeper into the comparison, the point of this video isn't to compare between them, but I want to highlight his area of specialties. You see, this burst of his is passive. Whenever you are in burst animation, getting knocked back or whatsoever, the burst will still take on effect and do the work for you. And this is an important difference between other characters. This is especially useful for bloom rated reaction when you can still do damage passively through like Nilo Bloom's example, and also with Hyper Bloom team comps, and even Burgeon if you have the right pyro character to help you do the work. So this is the edge that Ayato's burst field can provide to you. And on top of that, his burst does comes with a really nice normal attack boost buff. Well, it's not a lot, but for your on-field DPS, it can be a pretty good and welcome buff for them. So far, you might have noticed that I've only been focusing on Ayato's Hydro application as his main advantages, but I don't really talk about anything else. The thing is, when it comes to his damage, he is decent, but he is designed as an AoE damage dealer, with a room for stronger performance depending on your support's capability. And due to these two reasons alone, his raw talent wouldn't impress anybody, just like Cyno. And moreover, in terms of single target, he will also not impress anyone as well. But if you can create the situation and scenario necessary to maximize his AoE ability, you will get impressive results. But this also highlights another issue. It does demand your ability to position your setup and also recognizing the opponent's movement patterns to maximize his value. But I think nowadays it might not be too bad, given that from Sumeru onwards, enemies tends to be more aggressive. Like in Sumeru, we do have Aeromites that tends to come towards you aggressively. Then in version 4, we got the new Fatuis that tends to teleport towards your location. These are pretty good for Ayato when it comes to trying to gather them in their place. I do think that in some sense, the need to position and guide your opponent towards the location you need to is kind of like a reflection towards his character in story. Him being a commissioner tries to perform his work efficiently by thinking ahead of time, and all these kinds of like work really well in terms of his gameplay aspect altogether. And with that, that is pretty much all about Ayato's value to you. And I do want to close off by saying that these two characters, while they may not be the top character to choose when playing difficult content, but they can still work. And if you like to use their mechanics, you like their gameplay, like their characters, want to make them work, then there isn't a problem. The only thing that you need to look forward to is to find ways to horizontally invest by looking out for more strong support characters like Furina and Mahida that could work for a lot of characters. Those support characters will help to make your favorite characters viable in any content. Or otherwise, you can also invest vertically in their capabilities like getting constellation or getting their signature weapons, or even just finding a weapon that can have a good general uses like the Primordial Jade Cutter for Ayato. That's pretty much all you have to know when you want to get Ayato or Cyno. And with that, I will see you next time.